Creating human-centered corporate film starts with one thing: authentic interviews. Not polished sound bites, not perfectly crafted answers. Real conversations that let people speak like human beings. But most corporate interviews fail because we try to control the conversation instead of discovering the story. Interviewing is an art. It's about listening, reading the room, and following what someone reveals, not controlling what they say. But in corporate work, we often treat it like a transaction, and that's when the connection disappears. Last week, I talked about the shift that made me stop making corporate videos and start creating corporate films. So this week, I wanted to revisit a video I created that breaks down one of the most important foundations of corporate filmmaking: how I approach interviews without a script or a list of questions. It shows what actually changes when you stop directing the conversation and start listening, how trust is built before the first question, and how real story surfaces when you give people the space to speak. Now make sure you stay until the end. I'll share a free guide you can download to learn more about my approach on the art of interviewing. Let's dive right in. The key to conducting better interviews, the kind that feel honest, human, and unforgettable, is by becoming a better listener. I was hired many years ago by a Fortune 100 company in the financial industry, so it was very regulated, and they had to use script. They only wanted to be scripted. They didn't want to do interviews because they wanted to control the narrative. And I understand in a company of that size, with a brand that's worldwide, they wanted to make sure that the people that we were using in those videos were actually saying the right words. And so we created those videos, and it was just painful. It was very, very difficult to watch because those people were not actors. It was often their first time in front of a camera, and they were reading off of a teleprompter. And my entire job was to coach them into trying to be more comfortable. The problem when using a teleprompter is you stop moving because you're just reading. So your brain is shutting off any kind of facial movement, any kind of facial expression, and you have to force that. Like right now, I'm reading off of a teleprompter, but I have to consciously move my hands in order for everything to move in a natural way. And so that was my entire job, was to try to coach people through the delivery of those scripts. And some did much better than others. But at the end of the day, you end up with a content that's very sterile, cold, and is just not great. And what happened is we did this for probably about 3 years. And eventually what happened is one of the participants said, and he was not the first one, but in that occasion, he said, "Man, I wish I could just have a conversation with you." And we continued to go through the script. And at the end, when we were done, I said, "You know what, let's just do that. Let's just, you and I have a conversation." And so I walked away with both versions, the scripted version and then the interview version. And I edited both pieces, and I showed my client both pieces. And it was night and day. It was just night and day. And even their compliance department could not deny the fact that it made for a much better, more effective piece. And so then it just became part of reassuring the client on, we can still deliver. You can trust the process of us capturing the right content. And you can trust the fact there is still a post-production process where you can still control the content of telling me that's not okay, we cannot use this soundbite. And so we moved away completely from scripted at that time, and we haven't looked back. I've serviced that clients for the last 15 years, and really only the first 3 years were scripted, and after that we moved on, and we've been doing interviews only. And so the key is to forget the script. You have to start with the conversation. You need to let your curiosity guide you. And I want to show you this raw clip, and don't judge me too harsh on the actual video. It's a very old video that I did a long time ago with some very basic equipment at the time. But it's a great example because when you let your curiosity take over, sometimes magical things can happen. And so let's watch this clip. What's the one thing that makes you come back every day?
Oh, I know you're going to get to me. Uh, when I was small, I spent a lot of time with my grandfather. And he was doing all that recycling and all that great stuff before it was popular, before global warming or whatever you want to call it. And one day I asked him, I said, Grandpa, what do you think is the greatest wasted resource? And he said, the human. And he said, don't ever waste a human. So every day, I get to drive down Lake Michigan and come here, and I know I'm a good person because I get to help. And there's a sense of really great pride that's humble when you do that. So that's why I come back every day.
There's no way to manufacture that moment. Like, I don't do a lot of pre-production work with the interviewees. I try not to do any of it. I have pre-production calls with my clients pretty much for every project. And sometimes the interviewees are on the call and they will always ask me, or very often ask me, so what are you going to ask? And my answer is very simple. Well, I don't know what I'm going to ask you because I'm going to ask you questions based on the answers you're giving me. And typically that doesn't make them feel very comfortable. And so we have to walk through the process of saying, hey, it's just a conversation. I will probably start with some generic question just to get us going. But really, I'm just interested in learning about you, what you're doing, and whatever project we're working on. And then I can direct question based on some of your answers. And so if you would have discovered that in a pre-production call, if she would have said that story on the phone and you write that down, say, hey, talk to me about your grandfather, you would have gotten that story. But there's no way that you would have captured that moment because she would have said it in a very different way. And so that moment was unique, and it's unique because of the way she responded to it. And she allowed herself to be engulfed in those emotions that she had. And so my job really is to create an environment where the person feels comfortable enough to allow himself or herself to get to the place that we just saw. The process starts the moment I walk into the location. And that means my first interaction, me introducing myself when I walked through the door. And the handshake and walking through the location to find where exactly I want to shoot the interview. Already there, I'm on the lookout, and I'm trying to set a tone based on my confidence and my empathy, to let the client know that I'm here to portray them in the best possible light, and that I have them, that I'm going to protect them, and they need to feel confident in my ability to do the job. And I feel like I'm able to verbalize my expertise in a way that's not arrogant or demeaning. And I also feel like I'm a friendly, accessible person, and I try to show that as much as possible in those first few moments so that they have a full trust in the process. They can literally say, I'm not the expert, you're the expert, go do what you do. It also goes into the actual setup of the room for the interview. And again, a lot of what I do has protection in mind. Now, obviously, I want to get the best possible looking shots, right? And so I'm going to find the best angle. I'm going to try to set up my lights the best way possible to make them look as good as possible. But I also have to think through them being comfortable. And so, for example, if I'm conducting an interview in a conference room that's has windows into the lobby, for example, or glass into the lobby, I'm going to face them with either their back towards the lobby, which means now I'm shooting towards the lobby, or I'm going to face them. They're going to face the lobby, but I'm going to block the view, right? I'm going to either put an egg there or they have blinds so that if people walk by, they don't feel more vulnerable than they already feel, because being interviewed is already vulnerable, especially by a stranger, right? Like they're in front of a camera, they've never done this before. There's this stranger guy asking me a question. And on top of that, now there's traffic in the hallway or in the lobby. So all those things, I try to keep that in mind as far as where I'm going to set up so that they feel like this is a safe place. When they're sitting in the chair, I try to give them as little instruction as possible, because I don't want them to feel the need to perform or the fact that don't do this, do that. Like, no, it's just a conversation. Like you wouldn't do that with your buddy having a conversation. Like, hey, do it this way. Make sure you say that. Don't say this, right? So I try not to do that. I do tell them that we're not live. That if they want to, answer the question again, it's not a problem. And I also say, and if I ask you a dumb question, just let me know that it's a dumb question and we'll move on. To me, it's a very important statement, and the wording is important. And because it lets them know that I'm also in a position where I will probably screw up. I will probably make some mistakes. You are more qualified than me to answer those questions. You know what we're talking about better than I do, right? And so not only is it giving them the freedom to say, I don't want to answer that question or whatever, but it also puts me at a same level as they are. Hopefully they feel that way, but that's the idea. And I want to show you this clip right here because I asked, I think, a poorly worded question. I don't use that as an excuse, but English is my second language. And so there are still things, and I'm sure you guys have noticed, especially if this is not your first video watching me, you've watched a few of them, I put S's in the wrong places, or I mess up on the grammar here and there, or whatever the situation is. And so this particular question was just not well put together. I didn't do a good job phrasing it right. And right away, you'll see her reaction. And then I can quickly pivot and rephrase it with just one word that she was able to latch on. Let's watch. I'm assuming that because you're that first call, you're able to kind of see the impact of the work that the whole team is doing for those clients. So can you talk to me about what it does for you as far as seeing those results? It's got to be rewarding, right? To see you guys are doing all this work and then you get to communicate some of those things.
It's really rewarding when we bring a new client onto the team. And
so see how she responded and grabbed onto the word rewarding and then was able to then deliver her answer. And so it's important that we are attentive to their reaction physically. And it's also important that we pay attention to our body language, because we have a real opportunity to encourage and protect people when they're talking to us. So again, most of the time I'm doing off-camera interviews where they're looking at me instead of looking at the camera. And I try to amplify my reactions to let them know that they're doing a good job, right? So I'm going to put on big smile. I'm going to nod my head to say, yes, this is good, right? Those type of things, always keeping eye contact. And that's why I also don't use a list of questions, because looking down would be very distracting for the person talking to me, and also a lack of respect. Like, you're not actually listening to me. You're more concerned about where we're at on this process versus actually what I'm saying. I don't ever ask my interviewees to rephrase the question into their answer. And I know that a lot of producers do that. A lot of people do that. But to me, I have countless and countless examples of people where you physically see their face change after you ask the question, because they're trying to process, okay, how am I going to rephrase what he just told me before they can even think about their answer. So at that point, the moment is gone too. And so for me, the way I look at it is, if I'm a good editor, if I'm good at my job in post-production, I should have no problem taking their answers and build a narrative that still gives me context of what we're talking about. I want to show you this other example. This is a project for a financial service company. So it's a very, pretty dry topic to begin with. And I asked him a very simple question on the relationship that he's able to build with his clients over time, because most of his clients, stay clients for him or with him for many years. And so I asked him about the importance of those relationships. Let's watch.
But those are some of the, not only some of the best relationships I've had, they're very, very close personal friendships, where I've been asked to speak at people's funerals. So it's meaningful.
Yeah. Did you ever thought, getting into this business, that you would get to that level of relationship with your clients?
I'm a relationship guy. That's why I got so many friends in this business and out of the business. So it's one of the things I like the most about the business, besides the investment side. So
that was unexpected too, and I think it was somewhat unexpected on his end. And I could see right away that was not his intent. And it's not the objective of that particular video. And the reality is, I'm never hunting for to make people cry on camera. Like, that's never the goal, right? Like, the goal is not to force one emotion or another. The goal is to generate an environment and a conversation that allows them to express themselves however they want to express themselves. And I think in that particular example, I could see discomfort from him in the fact that he did that, because it didn't quite fit what we were trying to achieve. And so there is a responsibility that I have when people are vulnerable to that level, and that's to protect the emotion, protect that moment, protect them. And in some instances, like with the physical therapist that we watched earlier, then it's appropriate, right? To continue and ask follow-up question on that topic. For that particular project, I didn't feel that it would add even more to the story for me to continue in that line of questioning. And I could also tell that that's not where he wanted to go. And so it was important that right away I switched to a more generic question, just to let him know, hey, I got you. I got you. Let's recover. Let's go into this more generic topic, just to give you a minute to catch yourself. Okay. And sometimes, like I think with the physical therapist, we actually cut the camera for a second, just so that she can literally, like, I don't remember if she went to the bathroom and recompose herself or whatever she needed to do. And so sometimes that's needed if really the emotion was pretty high and now we need to somehow transition to something, and like her nose is running, whatever the situation is. But for the most part, I don't. But sometimes I do allow them a minute, and I can do that in a couple ways. What I typically like to do is I will, if I'm trying to have them recompose themselves, I would ask a question that's a little longer than typical. I will take more time to speak to allow them time to recover. And then when I start seeing that they're coming back and they're getting a hold of the emotion, then I can ask a question, and then we're back on track. Let's go into the investment a little bit, because I know that's kind of your bread and butter, your specialty. Can you talk to me about what the firm offers you as an advisor, and how you're able to use those tools to, again, then benefit your clients?
Sure.
Now, when I end an interview, I always end the same way, by asking them, is there something I haven't asked you that you think is important? And that's an important question too, because now not only am I opening myself up to discover more information, another side of the story that maybe I didn't think about. If they don't give you new information, a lot of times they would kind of recap the entire conversation in like a really nice packaged soundbite. So listening is the most important part of interviewing someone. And I know that it's hard. It's difficult to be fully engaged in the conversation where you're really listening to what they're saying when you have all those other things in your mind as far as, is the lighting okay? Is the sound okay? Are we getting the content that we need for the project? And it could be very stressful, especially when the clients are there or there's a bunch of people in the room. And but I think great interviews happen when you stop trying to get something out of someone, and instead you just let that something come through them. And that only happens with presence, patience, and real listening. So put down the list, be present, let your face and body speak without words, trust your subjects, trust the edit, and let the story reveal itself. Because the best interviews aren't found on paper. They're found in the moments between the questions. Now, I hope this gave you some new ideas and practical tools for conducting more authentic story-driven interviews. If this way of interviewing resonates with you, I put everything I've learned about interviewing over the last 2 decades into a guide called The Art of Interviewing. It's available for purchase on Amazon, but I've made it available for free through the link in the description. Inside, I break down how to capture real conversation on camera, how to earn trust, how to listen to the story instead of directing it, and how to stay on brand without scripting people into something they're not. If you're interested in learning more about cinematography, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching, and happy filming.